The morning sun crawled over the eastern ridge, casting long shadows across the frost-covered meadow. Martha Brennan stood on her cabin porch, a steaming cup of chicory coffee warming her weathered hands. At 38, she'd lived alone on this mountain slope for near 7 years now, and the townsfolk down in Copper Creek had plenty to say about it. That Brennan woman, they'd whisper in the general store, voices dropping low when discussing her peculiar ways. Never took another man after losing her family, lives up there like some hermit, won't let nobody past her door. Martha knew what they said. On her monthly trips for supplies, she caught the sideways glances, heard the hushed conversations that stopped when she entered Muller's store. The men would tip their hats polite enough, but their wives clutched their shawls tighter, as if her solitude might be catching. Truth was, Martha preferred it this way. Her small holding provided everything she needed: a vegetable garden that caught the morning sun, a dozen chickens that laid regular, 2 milk cows, and knowledge of every healing herb that grew wild on the mountainside. She'd learned the plants from her mother, back when life held different promises. The cabin itself wasn't much to look at. Single room with a stone fireplace, a bed in the corner behind a worn calico curtain. Rough-hewn table and chairs her late husband James had made with his own hands. But it was hers, built strong enough to weather the harsh Montana winters, far enough from town to avoid unwanted visitors. She sipped her coffee and watched her breath cloud in the cold air. First frost meant she needed to finish harvesting the late squash, pull the last of the carrots, and prepare her root cellar for the long months ahead. Living alone meant doing a man's work and a woman's too. But she'd grown strong these 7 years. Her hands, once soft from tending babies and making biscuits, now bore calluses from axe handles and plow reins. "Morning, Buttercup," she called to her yellow cow, who lowed in response from the small barn. The animals knew her routine well as she did, milking at dawn, feeding the chickens, checking the fence line for breaks. Simple work that kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering to places better left alone. It was while collecting eggs that she found herself thinking about the letter tucked in her Bible. Her sister Rose, living comfortable back east, writing again about finding a new husband, starting over. "You're still young enough," Rose had penned in her careful script. "No sense wasting away on that mountain like some dried-up spinster." Martha snorted at the memory. Rose didn't understand. How could she? Rose hadn't held 3 children as fever took them one by one. Hadn't watched her husband waste away from the same sickness, helpless despite all her herbs and prayers. Rose still believed in second chances, in hearts mending like torn fabric. By noon, Martha had filled 2 baskets with the last garden harvest and hung bundles of sage and yarrow from the cabin rafters to dry. The familiar work steadied her. Each task a small victory against the wilderness that constantly tried to reclaim her cleared land. She was splitting kindling when she heard horses on the trail below. Her hand tightened on the axe handle. Visitors were rare and rarely welcome. Through the trees, she made out 2 riders, their mounts picking careful steps up the rocky path. Martha recognized them as they drew closer. Tom Harper and his boy Luke from the Double J Ranch, their spread bordering her property to the south. Tom had tried courting her that first year after James died, bringing fresh beef and offers to help with the heavy work. She'd turned him away gentle but firm, and he'd eventually married the widow Carlson instead. Afternoon, Mrs. Brennan. Tom called, touching his hat brim. The boy, maybe 16 now, stayed quiet beside his father. "Mr. Harper." Martha didn't set down the axe. "Something I can do for you?" "Just passing through, checking our fence line. Thought we'd see if you needed anything before the snow flies." "I manage fine, thank you." Tom shifted in his saddle, his weathered face showing discomfort. "Ma'am, I don't mean to speak out of turn, but folks in town are talking. That new preacher, Reverend Dalton, he's been saying things about women living improper, alone and such." Martha's jaw tightened. "And what business is it of his or anyone else's how I live?" "None at all. In my thinking. Just thought you should know." Some of the men been drinking and talking foolish, saying maybe you need looking after whether you want it or not. The threat hung in the cold air between them. Martha had heard such talk before, how a woman alone was either a witch or a whore. Certainly not natural. The fact that she'd never taken another man to her bed seemed to offend them more than if she'd taken a dozen. I appreciate the warning, Mr. Harper, but I've got a Henry rifle and know how to use it. Any man comes up here uninvited will learn that quick enough. Tom nodded, unsurprised. I figured as much. Just wanted you to know, me and some of the other ranchers, we don't hold with forcing things on folks. You need help, real help, you send word. After they left, Martha stood long moments staring at the trail. 7 years she'd built this life, healing when folks needed her skills, trading herbs and vegetables for what she couldn't grow or make. 7 years of proving a woman could stand alone. As afternoon shadows grew long, she carried water from the spring, her shoulders aching from the yoke's weight. Inside the cabin, she built up the fire and set beans to soak for tomorrow's supper. The familiar routine couldn't quite shake Tom Harper's warning from her mind. She took down her husband's rifle from above the mantel, checking its action, counting ammunition. James had taught her to shoot straight, back when they'd first homesteaded and wolves still roamed bold. The weapon felt heavy in her hands, but she'd defended what was hers before, against claim jumpers, against wandering drunks, against loneliness itself. Night fell early this time of year. Martha lit her single lamp and settled by the fire with her mending. The wedding ring quilt on her bed needed patching, worn thin from 7 winters. As her needle worked, she found herself humming an old hymn her mother used to sing. The sound of her own voice startled her to silence. When had she last sung? When had she last spoken to anyone beyond the necessary words of trade and business? The animals didn't count, though she talked to them plenty. Outside, wind rattled the shutters she'd reinforced last month. Winter coming on fast this year. She'd need to bring in more wood. Maybe butcher one of the older chickens for preserving. Always something needing doing when you work the land alone. A wolf howled somewhere up the mountain, answered by another. Martha listened without fear. She knew every sound this mountain made, the scream of wildcats, the rustle of deer browsing, the way wind sang different through pine and aspen. These were her companions now, more reliable than people with their judgment and expectations. Still, as she banked the fire and prepared for bed, Tom Harper's words nagged at her. New preacher stirring up old prejudices, men drinking and talking about what wasn't their business. She'd faced down worse, but she wasn't fool enough to ignore a warning from a decent man. Behind her calico curtain, Martha undressed and slipped into her nightgown. The bed felt vast and cold as always, but she'd long stopped expecting it to feel otherwise. Some might pity her for sleeping alone these 7 years, but they didn't understand the peace of it. No demands on her body or heart. No risk of loss that cut so deep it near killed you too. She lay listening to the night sounds, one hand resting on the rifle she'd propped beside the bed. Tomorrow she'd ride to town despite it not being her usual day. Best to show her face. Remind them she was just a woman making her way, not some story to frighten children or tempt fools. But tonight, she was safe in her solitude, her empty bed a choice rather than a burden. Let them talk down in Copper Creek. Martha Brennan had survived worse than wagging tongues. She'd carved out her place on this mountain with sweat and stubbornness, and no preacher or whiskey-brave fool would drive her from it. The moon rose full through her single window, flooding the cabin with silver light. In that light, the empty spaces seemed less like absence and more like possibility, room to breathe, to be, to exist without explaining or apologizing. Martha closed her eyes, pulling the wedding ring quilt up to her chin. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, she slept as she'd slept these 7 years, alone, but on her own terms. The October wind cut sharp across the valley as Samuel McKenna guided his horse through the herd, counting head one last time before driving them to the lower pasture. At 43, he'd been working cattle longer than half the men in the county had been alive, and his weathered face showed every hard winter and dry summer. "That's 312, he called to his hired hand. Young Pete Olson. Same as yesterday. Pete nodded, pulling his coat tighter. Getting cold early this year. Mr. McKenna. Reckon we'll see snow before November? Likely so. Sam squinted at the heavy clouds building over the western peaks. 22 years he'd been reading this sky, learning its moods like a man might learn his wife's faces. Though he'd only had 8 years to learn Clara's before the accident took her and little Emma both. The memory still caught him sideways sometimes, sharp as that October wind. Clara's laugh, the way Emma would run to meet him when he came in from the range, all of it gone in one terrible moment when her horse spooked at a rattler, sending the buggy over the cliff edge. "Mr. McKenna," Pete's voice pulled him back. "You want me to start moving them? Go ahead, I'll catch up." Sam watched the boy ride off, eager and green as Sam himself had been once, before the war, before Clara, before he learned how much a man could lose and still keep breathing. These days, folks in Copper Creek called him a hard man, and maybe they were right. He worked from dawn past dusk, spoke little, smiled less. What was there to smile about when you came home to an empty house? His spread, the Rockingham, sat 4 miles north of town, bordered on one side by Tom Harper's Double J, and on the other by the mountain where that peculiar Brennan woman lived alone. Sam had seen her a few times in town, a handsome woman in a plain way, keeping to herself as much as he did. Folks talked about her too, though different than they talked about him. A man alone was just ornery. A woman alone was unnatural. By the time Sam and Pete got the cattle settled, the sun was dropping low. Pete headed to the bunkhouse while Sam tended his horse. The familiar ritual of brushing and feeding more comfort than chore. The barn smelled of hay and leather, honest sense that asked nothing of him. "Getting too old for this," he muttered to his gelding, Buck, who snorted in what might have been agreement. Sam's back ached from 12 hours in the saddle, his hands stiff with cold. Time was. He'd thought about selling out, moving to California or Oregon, starting fresh. But this land held Clara and Emma, buried in the small plot behind the house. How could he leave them? In the house, Sam built up the fire and heated last night's stew. The place was clean but sparse, a man's space without any softening touches. Clara's things he'd packed away that first year, unable to bear seeing her sewing basket or Emma's rag doll. Now the house felt more like a bunkhouse where he happened to sleep than a home. He ate standing by the window, watching darkness creep across his land. Good grazing land, water rights secured, buildings solid, a legacy for no one. His brother back in Missouri had sons, but they were town boys. Wouldn't know a branding iron from a fence post. After supper, Sam sat by the fire with the week-old newspaper from town, reading about beef prices and railway expansion, anything to fill the silence. He'd tried keeping a dog once, but when it died of snake bite, the loss hit harder than it should have. Better to need nothing. No one. The next morning brought frost and the kind of crystal air that made the mountains seem close enough to touch. Sam worked alongside Pete, mending fence and checking water holes. The boy chattered about the dance coming up at the Grange Hall, which girls might attend, whether his saved wages would buy a new shirt. "You planning to go, Mr. McKenna?" Sam snorted. "Dancing's for young fools. Weren't you young once? Different times." Sam had danced plenty with Clara, her yellow hair flying as he spun her to the fiddle music. That man felt like a stranger now, someone who'd believed in happiness lasting. Pete wisely dropped the subject, though Sam caught him sneaking glances like he was trying to picture his stern boss as a young man courting. Let him wonder. Better than trying to explain how a man could be emptied out, heart scrubbed clean of anything soft. That afternoon, Tom Harper rode over on business. They stood by the corral discussing plans for the spring drive to the railhead, which outfit to hire for the chuck wagon, whether to pool their herds for better prices. Martha Brennan came to town yesterday. Tom mentioned casual-like. Caused quite a stir at the church meeting. Sam kept his eyes on the horses. That's so? Reverend Dalton tried to lecture her about proper Christian living for women. She told him she'd been living proper for 7 years without his guidance and didn't need it now. Despite himself. Sam felt his mouth twitch. Bet that went over well. Like a rattler in a church picnic. But she stood her ground, even when some of the biddies started clucking. Woman's got sand. I'll give her that. Sam had heard the stories about Martha Brennan, how she'd buried her family and kept to herself since. He understood that choice, the safety of solitude. Though a woman faced risks, a man didn't. Living alone, the world wasn't kind to those who didn't fit its expectations. After Tom left, Sam found himself thinking about the Brennan woman as he worked, both of them choosing isolation over the risk of caring again. Did she wake at night reaching for someone who wasn't there? Did she talk to her animals just to hear a voice, even her own? Fool thoughts, he muttered, attacking the woodpile with unnecessary force. What business was it of his how another person managed grief? But that night, as he sat with his empty plate and silent rooms, Sam couldn't shake the image of another soul eating supper alone. Maybe 4 miles as the crow flies, but a lifetime away in all the ways that mattered. He'd built these walls around himself board by board, season by season. They kept the herd out. Sure enough, but they kept everything else out too. The first storm warning came 3 days later, temperature dropping fast, clouds building heavy and dark. Sam and Pete worked fevered to prepare, moving the cattle to sheltered areas, securing loose equipment, bringing in extra feed from the far barn. Never seen clouds that color, Pete said nervously. Like a bruise over the whole sky. Sam studied the horizon, unease prickling his neck. In 22 years, he'd weathered some fierce storms, but something about this one felt different. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Soon as we're done here, you head to town, he told Pete. Stay at the boarding house until this blows over. What about you? I'll be fine. Rode out worse than this. But as Pete disappeared down the road and Sam battened down for the storm, he wondered if that was true. A man could ride out weather easy enough. It was the other storms, the ones that howled inside where no walls could stop them, that wore you down winter by winter. The wind picked up as darkness fell, rattling windows and sending loose boards banging. Sam built the fire high and pulled on an extra shirt. Outside, Buck and the other horses stamped nervous in the barn. He'd check them once more before the worst hit, make sure they had water and calm feed, standing in his doorway. Sam watched the first snow begin to fall, heavy flakes that meant business. Somewhere up on that mountain, Martha Brennan was watching the same storm roll in. Did she have enough wood split? Were her animals secured? Not his concern, he told himself firmly. They'd each chosen their solitary paths. But as the wind howled louder and the temperature plummeted, Sam couldn't quite convince himself that islands could stand alone forever. Even the strongest fence post could snap under enough pressure. Even the most carefully guarded heart might remember, in the depths of a killing storm, what warmth felt like. He closed the door against the wind and returned to his empty house, to wait out whatever was coming. But for the first time in years, the silence felt less like peace and more like something that needed filling. Sam poured himself a whiskey and tried not to think about another soul. 4 miles away, facing the same storm alone. The storm hit with a fury Sam had never seen in all his years ranching. What started as heavy snow turned into a white wall of rage, wind screaming like demons across the valley. He'd meant to wait it out safe in his house, but by midnight, the barn doors were banging fit to tear off their hinges. Cursing, Sam pulled on his heavy coat and wrapped a scarf tight around his face. The moment he stepped outside, the wind nearly knocked him flat. Snow drove horizontal, stinging exposed skin like needles. He couldn't see the barn, though it stood not 30 feet away, fighting for every step. Sam made it to the barn and wrestled the doors secure. The horses were wild-eyed with fear, and he spent precious minutes calming them, checking their water hadn't frozen. By the time he started back, he could barely feel his fingers inside his gloves. That's when Buck broke free. The gelding burst through the stall gate Sam hadn't latched proper in his haste, crashing out the side door into the storm. Without thinking, Sam lunged after him. A man didn't let his horse die in weather like this. not a horse that had carried him faithful for 8 years. "Buck! Whoa, boy!" His voice vanished in the wind. Sam stumbled after the fleeing shadow. Following broken snow trail and instinct, the world had shrunk to a few feet of swirling white. No landmarks, no direction, just the killing cold and the need to find his horse. He didn't know how long he searched. Time stopped meaning anything in that white hell. His legs grew heavy, stumbling more often. Ice built up on his scarf where his breath froze. Still he pushed on, calling for Buck until his throat went raw. It was the gelding who found him, appearing out of the snow like a ghost, head down and sides heaving. Sam grabbed the halter with numb hands, nearly weeping with relief. But when he turned to head back, he realized the terrible truth. He had no idea which direction the ranch lay. They were lost in the blizzard, and the cold was winning. Sam knew better than to panic. Panic killed men faster than cold. He needed shelter, any kind of windbreak. Leading Buck, he stumbled forward, praying for a ravine, a stand of trees, anything. His boots had filled with snow, feet like blocks of ice. How long before frostbite? How long before he simply lay down in the snow and didn't get up? Through the howling wind, he thought he smelled smoke. Wood smoke, unless his mind was playing tricks. Sam turned into the wind, following that faint promise of warmth. Buck pressed close behind him, the horse knowing death when it breathed down his neck. Then, like salvation itself, a faint glow appeared through the white, a window, a lit window meaning life and warmth and shelter from the storm. Sam stumbled to the door, barely able to lift his fist to pound on the heavy wood. "Hello, anyone there? Please?" For terrible moments, nothing. Then the scrape of a bar lifting, and the door cracked open. A woman's face appeared, eyes wide with shock. Martha Brennan, rifle in hand, staring at him like he was a ghost. "Please," Sam managed through frozen lips. "My horse." She looked past him to where Buck stood shivering, then back to Sam's ice-covered face. Whatever she saw there decided her. The door opened wide. "Get in here before you freeze to death." Sam didn't remember much of the next few minutes. Martha taking Buck's reins, leading the horse to a small lean-to attached to her cabin. Her strong hands helping Sam inside, sitting him by the fire, the agony of feeling returning to his fingers and toes. "Drink this." She pressed a cup of something hot into his hands. Coffee laced with whiskey that burned down his throat. "What in God's name were you doing out in this?" "Horse got loose." His voice came out rough. "Got turned around?" "You're lucky you found my place." "Another 10 minutes." She didn't finish, busy pulling off his frozen boots. Sam wanted to protest, to say he could manage, but his hands were shaking too hard. "Your feet are bad." Martha's voice was matter-of-fact as she examined his toes. "Not frozen through, but close. This is going to hurt." She was right, as she rubbed feeling back into his feet. The pain was like being burned alive. Sam gritted his teeth, gripping the chair arms. Martha worked steady and sure, knowing hands that had done this before. "There's dry clothes in that trunk," she said, nodding to a corner. "They were my husband's. You need to get out of those wet things." Sam hesitated. Taking a dead man's clothes felt wrong somehow. But Martha had turned away, busying herself at the stove, giving him privacy. Survival won over propriety. The clothes were worn but clean, smelling faintly of cedar. They fit well enough, though the man must have been broader through the shoulders. "Thank you," Sam said when he was dressed. The simple words felt inadequate for saving his life. Martha set a bowl of stew in front of him. "Eat. You need to warm up from the inside, too." They sat in silence while Sam ate, the storm raging outside. The cabin was small but tight-built, wind finding no cracks to whistle through. He noticed things as his mind thawed along with his body. Herbs hanging from the rafters, books on a shelf, everything neat and ordered. A woman making a life alone. Same as him, but different. "Your horse will be all right," Martha said finally. "I gave him some grain, rubbed him down. That lean-to's small but solid. I'm grateful for everything. I know showing up like this." You showed up dying." Her gray eyes were steady on his. "I wouldn't turn away a rabid wolf in this weather, much less a neighbor." Neighbor. They'd lived 4 miles apart for years and never spoke beyond a nod in town. Sam studied her face in the firelight. Not pretty in the conventional way, but strong-featured, honest, lines around her eyes from sun and sorrow. He wondered if his own face told the same story. "I should bed down in the barn," he said as he finished eating. "I've imposed enough." Martha looked at him like he'd suggested jumping off a cliff. "That lean-to barely fits your horse. You'd freeze before morning." "Then I'll sit by the fire." "Mr. McKenna." Her voice held a note of exasperation. "This storm's not letting up tonight. We're both grown people who've buried spouses. I think we can manage to be practical about sleeping arrangements without scandal." She was right, of course. They were past the age for foolish propriety, and dying for appearances would be the height of stupidity. Still, Sam felt awkward as Martha efficiently set about making up a pallet by the fire with blankets from her trunk. "You take the bed," he said firmly. "This is your home, and you're the one half frozen." But she didn't argue further, disappearing behind a curtain that sectioned off the sleeping area. Sam settled on the pallet, feeling every one of his 43 years. The fire crackled warm, the wind howled outside, and he was alive when he shouldn't be. All because he'd stumbled to the right door. "Mrs. Brennan," he called softly. "Thank you for opening the door. I know what folks say about you living alone. You took a risk." There was silence from behind the curtain. Then, "Folks say plenty about both of us. Mr. McKenna doesn't make it true." Sam stared at the fire shadows on the ceiling. Here they were, 2 people who'd chosen isolation, forced together by a storm. He thought about Tom Harper's words, about Martha standing up to the Reverend. Woman had courage, that was certain. "My wife died in an accident," he found himself saying. "Her and our daughter both, 8 years ago." "I'm sorry." The words came soft from the darkness. "I lost my husband and 3 children to fever, 7 years back." 3 children. Sam closed his eyes against that pain. One had nearly killed him. How did someone survive 3? That why you stay up here alone? "That's why." A pause. "You?" "Same, I reckon. Easier than risking it again." They fell quiet. But it was a different silence than Sam was used to. Not empty, but full of understanding. 2 people who knew the weight of loss, sharing space while a killer storm raged outside. Sleep came slow. Sam listened to the wind, the fire settling, the small sounds of another person breathing nearby. How long since he'd slept under the same roof as another soul? The strangeness of it kept him wakeful, but underneath was something else. Comfort, maybe. The animal reassurance of not being alone in the dark. Sometime before dawn, the wind began to ease. Sam dozed fitful, waking when Martha rose to tend the fire. She moved quiet, trying not to disturb him, but he sat up anyway. "Storm's passing," she said, not looking at him. In the dim light, her face seemed younger, softer. "I'll leave it first light. Get out of your way." Martha turned then, and something in her expression made his chest tight. "You're not in my way, Mr. McKenna, but I know you'll go anyway. We both will do what we must to keep our walls up." She understood. Of course she did. They were alike in this, choosing safety over connection, ghosts over the living. Sam wanted to say something, to acknowledge the strange bond of this night, but words had never been his strong suit. Instead, he simply nodded. When dawn came gray and still, he'd take his horse and return to his empty house. Martha would bar her door again, and they'd go back to being strangers who happened to share a valley. The storm had forced them together, but storms always passed. For now, though, they sat by the fire while snow fell soft outside. 2 souls who'd forgotten the simple comfort of not being alone. It wouldn't last, couldn't last, given who they'd become. But for these few hours before dawn, it was enough. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the wind still moaned. but gentler now, like a beast growing tired. Sam shifted on his pallet, trying to find a position that didn't remind him of every year past 40. "Can't sleep either." Martha's voice came soft from behind the curtain. "Not much. Old bones don't take to floors like they used to." He heard her moving. Then the curtain pulled back. She stood there in a wool wrapper, hair braided for sleep, looking uncertain. "This is foolish. There's room enough in the bed for 2 people to sleep proper without anything improper. We're not young folks at a barn dance." Sam sat up, studying her face in the firelight. She was right, of course. They were both too old and too wounded for anything but practicality. "You're certain?" "I'm certain we both need rest, and that floor's not providing it." She turned back to the bed, voice matter of fact. "There's extra quilts. We can put them between us if it makes you feel more proper." Sam stood, joints protesting. The bed was a simple thing, rope-strung frame with a straw tick mattress, but after the floor it looked welcoming as heaven. Martha had already laid a rolled quilt down the middle, making a clear boundary. "Like the Continental Divide," he said, attempting lightness, "just so we understand each other." But there was a hint of smile in her voice as she settled on her side, pulling covers up to her chin. Sam lay down careful on his side, the space feeling strange and charged. The bed dipped with their combined weight, and he could hear her breathing. Smell the lavender sachets she must keep with her linens. When was the last time he'd shared a bed, even this innocent? Those last months with Clara, when she was carrying Emma, careful of her growing belly. "Your wife," Martha said quietly. What was she like? The question surprised him. People never asked about Clara anymore, as if speaking of the dead might summon their own losses. She was sunshine, always laughing, always seeing the good in things. Came from a merchant family in St. Louis. Probably could have married better than a rancher. But she chose you. She did. Lord knows why. Said I was the first man who listened when she talked instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. Martha made a small sound that might have been recognition. My James was quiet, steady, could fix anything with his hands, built this cabin board by board. Wasn't much for words, but he'd bring me wildflowers every spring. Said they reminded him of my smile. They lay in silence, memories filling the space between them. Sam found himself oddly comforted by sharing Clara's memory with someone who understood loss. Not the platitudes people offered in town, but real knowing. 3 children, he said finally. I can't imagine. Thomas was 8, Sarah, 6. Baby Ruth just turned 2. Her voice stayed steady, but Sam heard the effort it cost. The fever took Thomas first. I thought if I could just nurse the others through, but it was too strong. James lasted longest, trying to help me tend them even as he burned. Martha, he didn't know what to say. Sorry was too small a word. Some days I still set the table for 5. The admission came whispered. Catch myself calling Sarah for supper or listening for Ruth's laugh. 7 years, and still I forget they're gone. Sam's throat felt tight. I keep Clara's garden going. Can't grow flowers worth a damn, but I try. Feel like if I let it go to weeds, I'm letting her go too. Yes, just that word, but it held understanding deep as a well. The storm chose that moment to rattle the windows harder, reminding them where they were. 2 strangers sharing a bed because nature left no choice. Speaking truths usually buried with the dead. Why don't you remarry? Martha asked. A man with a good ranch. You'd have your pick of widows or spinsters looking to settle. Sam considered the question. He'd asked himself the same many times. Tried courting once, about 3 years after. The widow Patterson, over in Cedar Falls. Nice woman, good cook. Had 2 boys needing a father, but sitting across from her at Sunday dinner, all I could think was how Clara would have seasoned the roast different, or laughed at something the boys said. Wasn't fair to her. Wanting someone else. I know. Martha shifted, the bed creaking. Tom Harper tried with me that first year. He's a good man, would have provided well, but when he took my hand to help me into the wagon, all I felt was how different it was from James's hand. Wrong size, wrong calluses, wrong everything. So we chose alone instead. Seemed kinder, to them and to us. They fell quiet again. Sam found himself oddly aware of every sound. Martha's breathing, the fire settling, his own heartbeat. The rolled quilt between them felt both necessary and absurd. What did they think would happen? Two people carved hollow by grief, suddenly overcome with passion? The thought almost made him laugh. "Tell me about your herbs," he said, needing safer ground. "I saw them hanging. You heal folks. When they let me. Learned from my mother and her mother before. Willow bark for fever. Echinacea for infection. Comfrey for breaks and sprains. Plants don't judge why you're alone or what you should be doing different. Unlike people. Unlike people." She paused. "That new reverend's been working folks up about me. Says it's unnatural, maybe even unchristian. A woman choosing solitude. Like marriage is the only way to serve God proper." Sam felt anger stir in his chest. "Man's a fool. You've got more Christian charity than most who sit in those pews come Sunday. Healing folks, asking nothing in return. You know about that? Tom Harper mentioned. Said you nursed his boy through pneumonia last winter. Wouldn't take payment. The boy needed help, that's all." But Sam heard the pleased note in her voice at being recognized for good works. How long since anyone had told her she was doing right? Living alone meant no criticism, but also no praise. No one to share small victories with. "I'm glad you were here tonight," he said. "Not just for saving my hide, for this talking. I'd forgotten how it felt to speak of Clara to someone who understands." "I know." Her voice came soft. "Sometimes the loneliness builds up like snow on a roof. Too much weight and something's bound to break." Sam felt the truth of that in his bones. All those silent suppers. All those nights staring at the fire with no one to share the day's troubles. He'd thought himself strong for enduring it, but maybe strength could become its own weakness. "Sun'll be up soon," Martha said. "Storm's moving on." Neither moved. In a few hours, Sam would return to his ranch, Martha to her solitary routine. This strange night would become a memory, something to puzzle over during long winter evenings. But for now, they lay still. Two souls who'd forgotten human warmth finding comfort in simple proximity. "Martha?" Sam said quietly. "If I came calling sometime, not courting, nothing like that, just to talk, maybe help with heavy work, would that be unwelcome?" The silence stretched so long he thought she'd fallen asleep or was choosing not to answer. Then, barely audible, "I don't know. I've gotten used to my walls. I understand walls." Sam stared at the ceiling. Rough-hewn beams, Clara used to say, looked like they were holding up the sky. Maybe that's why it might work. Two people who understand walls might know how to respect them, or might forget why they built them in the first place. The fear in her voice matched his own. It was one thing to share a bed forced by circumstance, guards down in the strange intimacy of crisis, another entirely to choose vulnerability in daylight, with escape routes open. "You're right," he said. "Forget I asked." But Martha surprised him. "I didn't say no. I said I don't know. There's a difference." They lay quiet as the first pale light crept through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried in white, but peaceful. Soon Sam would have to rise, reclaim his horse, make the cold journey home. But not yet, not quite yet. "Thank you," he said, "for opening your door, for the food and shelter. For remembering with me." "Thank you," Martha replied, "for reminding me I'm not the only one who chose empty over risk." The bed shifted as she sat up. Proper day returning with the light. But Sam thought something had shifted between them too. Some small crack in the walls they'd built so careful. Whether it would widen or seal back up remained to be seen. For now, it was enough to have passed a night not alone, to have spoken names usually held silent, to remember they were still human underneath all that armor. The storm had forced them together, but what they'd found in that forcing, that was theirs to keep or discard. Sam rose and began folding the blankets, returning the cabin to its proper order. But the memory of shared warmth, shared sorrow, shared understanding that would linger long after the snow melted, and maybe, just maybe, that was the first dangerous step toward something neither quite dared name. By the time Sam made it back to his ranch that morning, Pete had already returned from town, full of worry and questions. The boy's relief at seeing his boss alive quickly turned to curiosity when he noticed Sam wearing unfamiliar clothes. "Got caught in the storm," Sam said curtly, heading for the house. "Horse got loose, found shelter. But secrets in a small valley had a way of growing legs." Within 2 days, word had somehow spread that Sam McKenna had spent the night at the Brennan woman's cabin. Never mind that he'd nearly died in a blizzard. Folks had more interesting things to focus on. Sam first heard the talk at Muller's store when he went for supplies. Conversations stopped when he entered, started again in whispers when they thought he'd moved far enough away. Always figured there was something between those two. "Mrs.," Muller said to Mrs. Patterson, loud enough to carry. Both of them living alone all these years, so close by. Storm sure was convenient. "Mrs.," Patterson replied. "Funny how he ended up at her door of all places." Sam grabbed his coffee and flour, jaw tight. Let them talk. He'd survived worse than gossip. But as he loaded his wagon, he found himself thinking of Martha facing this same talk, and something protective stirred in his chest. The speculation grew worse by Sunday. Reverend Dalton, that newcomer from back east with ideas about proper Christian living, chose to preach on the sins of the flesh and the importance of marriage for sanctifying relations between men and women. His eyes found Sam in the congregation, lingered, moved on to where Martha sat alone in the back pew. "The Lord calls us to live in righteousness," Dalton intoned, "not in the darkness of sin, sneaking about like thieves in the night." Sam stood abruptly and walked out, not caring about the stir it caused. He'd buried his wife and child in the cemetery behind this church. He'd lived honest and alone for 8 years. No pompous preacher had the right to smear his name or Martha's over one night of survival. He was hitching Buck to the wagon when Tom Harper approached. "Sam, hold up. Got nothing to say. Tom, maybe not, but I do." Tom glanced around, lowered his voice. "What happened between you and Martha Brennan is your business, but people are working themselves up. Some of the men were talking yesterday about how she needs a husband to keep her proper, and if she won't choose one herself—" Sam's hand stilled on the harness. "They threatening her?" "Not yet. Just talk. But you know how talk can turn, especially when Dalton keeps stirring the pot. Thought you should know." After Tom left, Sam sat in his wagon a long moment. He'd brought this trouble to Martha's door. His presence in her cabin, innocent as it was, had given ammunition to those who already disapproved of her choices. The honorable thing would be to stay away, let the talk die down. Instead, he found himself turning Buck toward the mountain road. Martha was in her garden when he arrived, working the soil around her winter vegetables. She straightened as he approached, and he saw the wariness in her face. "Figured you'd heard the talk by now," she said without preamble. "I've heard, came to apologize for bringing trouble your way. You didn't bring anything." Martha wiped her hands on her apron. "Trouble was always coming. You just gave it an excuse to arrive sooner." They stood awkward in the bright winter sun, so different from that night of forced intimacy. Sam noticed she looked tired, lines of strain around her eyes. "Has anyone bothered you? Come up here unwanted?" "Not yet, though I've seen riders on the lower trail, watching." She met his eye steady. "I've got my rifle. I'll manage." "You shouldn't have to manage alone. This is my doing." "Stop!" Martha's voice cut sharp. "Don't you dare take responsibility for other people's small minds. You were dying. I opened my door. End of story." But it wasn't the end, and they both knew it. Sam dismounted, ground-tying Buck. "What can I do?" Martha studied him a long moment. "You can go home and forget you know me. That's the smart thing. What's the right thing?" That surprised a small smile from her. "Since when do men worry about right over smart? Since a woman saved my life and got grief for it." Martha turned back to her garden, but Sam saw her shoulders relax slightly. "If you're determined to help, That back fence needs mending. Storm took down a section. They worked in companionable silence. Sam handling the heavy posts while Martha held them steady. It felt natural, working alongside someone again. He'd forgotten the simple pleasure of shared labor, how it could say things words couldn't. They were nearly finished when riders appeared on the trail. 3 men from town, Jed Hawkins, who ran the livery, Carl Brenner from the bank, and Roy Patterson, the widow's eldest son. They stopped just outside Martha's gate, making no move to dismount. "Afternoon, Mrs. Brennan," Hawkins called, his eyes sliding between her and Sam. "McKenna." "Gentlemen," Martha's voice was cool. "Something I can do for you?" "Just checking on you, ma'am," Brenner said. "What with the storm and all, making sure you're managing all right?" The pause before managing was heavy with meaning. Sam felt his temper rise but kept working on the fence, letting Martha handle it. "I'm managing fine, as I have for 7 years, but thank you for your concern." "Thing is," Roy Patterson spoke up, young and full of righteous authority. "Reverend says it ain't fitting, a woman alone, especially after recent events." Sam straightened, hammer heavy in his hand. "What recent events would those be?" Roy flushed but held his ground. "Everyone knows you spent the night here. My ma says—" "Your ma says a lot of things." Sam cut him off. "Doesn't make them true or her business. Now see here, McKenna." "No, you see." Sam stepped forward, and the 3 men shifted nervous in their saddles. "I got caught in a blizzard. Mrs. Brennan saved my life. Anyone trying to make more of it than that has a mind that needs cleaning." "We're just looking out for the lady's reputation," Hawkins said. Martha laughed, surprising them all. "My reputation? I'm a widow who tends her own land and heals your children when they're sick. If that's not reputation enough after 7 years, one night of Christian charity won't change it." "The Reverend says," Brenner started, "the Reverend can say what he likes in his church. This is my land, and unless you have real business here, I'll ask you to move along." The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly having expected a different reception. Maybe tears, maybe shame, maybe gratitude for their concern. They hadn't expected Martha Brennan standing firm with Sam McKenna beside her, both of them united in disdain for busybody interference. "We're only trying to help," Hawkins said finally. "Then help by leaving me be." Martha's voice stayed level, but Sam heard the steel underneath. "I've buried my family, kept my land, survived everything this valley could throw at me. I don't need protection from your imaginations." After they left, dust settling in their wake, Martha sagged against the fence post. Sam saw her hands trembling slightly. "They'll be back," she said. "With more men, more pressure. This is just the beginning." "Then I'll be here too." Martha looked at him sharp. "Sam, no, that'll only make it worse. Maybe, or maybe they need to see you're not alone to prey on." He met her eyes. "I'm not courting you. Martha, we were clear on that, but I'll be damned if I let them hound you because you showed mercy to a fool who got lost in a storm." She was quiet a long moment, pride warring with practicality on her face. "This isn't your fight. It is now." Sam picked up his hammer again. "Besides, this fence won't fix itself." Martha watched him work, something shifting in her expression. "You're a stubborn man, Sam McKenna. Been called worse. I imagine you have." But there was warmth in her voice now, the first he'd heard since that night. "There's coffee on the stove if you want some." It was a small offering, but Sam understood the trust it represented. He followed her into the cabin that had saved his life, wondering if he was about to complicate hers beyond repair. But sometimes a man had to choose between safe and right, between smart and necessary. The gossips wanted a scandal? Fine. They'd get 2 stubborn souls standing together against their judgment instead. It wasn't romance. They were both too scarred for that. But it might be something else, something that could grow in the rocky soil of shared defiance. As Martha poured coffee with steady hands, Sam thought maybe that was enough for now. Maybe it was even a beginning. The second storm came a week later. Worse than the first. This time, Sam was ready. Had already moved his cattle to shelter and secured everything that could blow away. But as the wind picked up and snow began to fall, he found himself saddling Buck despite every piece of common sense telling him to stay put. "You're not riding out in this," Pete said, alarmed. "Not after last time. I'm checking the fence line." Sam lied. "Don't wait up." The truth was, he couldn't shake the image of Martha alone in that cabin with supplies maybe running low. The townsfolk had kept their distance since that day at her fence, but Sam had seen them watching, waiting. Bad weather might embolden them, thinking she'd be vulnerable. This time, he knew the way, even through the mounting snow. Buck seemed to remember too, picking his path steady toward the mountain. By the time they reached Martha's cabin, the storm had turned mean, but not yet the killer it would become. Martha opened the door before he could knock, rifle in hand until she saw who it was. "You're a fool, Sam McKenna, so I've been told." He led Buck to the shelter, noting she'd reinforced it since his last visit. "Thought you might need supplies." "I've weathered storms before, not with half the town waiting for you to fail." She couldn't argue that. Inside, Sam unpacked what he'd brought: coffee, flour, salt pork, ammunition for her rifle. Martha watched with an unreadable expression. "You can't keep doing this," she said finally. "Playing protector. It only feeds their gossip. Let them gossip." Sam warmed his hands by her fire. "I've got work needs doing tomorrow, but tonight I'm making sure you're set for this storm." They worked together as the blizzard built outside, bringing in extra wood, checking the livestock, filling every container with water before the pump froze. It felt natural now, moving around each other in the small space, anticipating needs without words. As darkness fell and the storm reached its full fury, they found themselves back by the fire with bowls of the stew Martha had made. The domesticity of it should have felt strange, but instead it felt like something Sam had been missing without knowing it. "Tell me about your ranch," Martha said. "I know the land, but not what you've built there." So Sam talked about the Rocking M, the herd he'd built up, the improvements he'd made over the years. Martha listened with the attention of someone who understood the work involved, asking questions that showed she knew more about ranching than most gave her credit for. "You've done well," she said when he finished. "Built something lasting." "Lasting for who?" The question slipped out before Sam could stop it. "No sons to pass it to. No one to care if it falls apart after I'm gone." Martha was quiet a moment. "I think about that too. This place James built with his own hands. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just keeping it alive out of stubbornness." "Nothing wrong with stubbornness." "No?" She smiled slightly. "Even when it keeps you alone on a mountain while people scheme to drive you off?" "They won't drive you off." Sam heard the fierceness in his own voice. "Not while I'm around." Martha set down her bowl carefully. "Sam, we need to speak plain. What are you doing here, really?" He'd asked himself the same question on the ride up. "I don't rightly know. Started out feeling responsible for the trouble I brought you, but now," he struggled for words, "I like being here, like working beside you, like talking to someone who understands. Is that wrong?" "Not wrong, but dangerous." Martha stood, began clearing their dishes. "We're not young, Sam. We can't afford to fool ourselves about what this is or isn't." "And what is it?" She turned to face him, backlit by the fire. "Two lonely people finding comfort. But comfort isn't the same as what we had before, what we lost. I know that." Sam stood too, needing to move. "Clara's gone. Your James is gone. I'm not looking to replace what can't be replaced." "Then what are you looking for?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Sam thought of his empty house, the silence that pressed in each night, the way he'd started looking forward to these visits more than anything else in his routine. "Maybe just this," he said finally. "Someone to share supper with, someone who doesn't need explaining to, someone who's not afraid of what we've become." Martha's expression softened. "That sounds like courting to me. Sam McKenna, Does it? He stepped closer, not touching but near enough to see the gold flecks in her gray eyes. Because courting's for people who believe in happily ever after. I'm just talking about making it through winter a little less alone. And come spring, we'll face spring when it comes. They stood there, the storm howling outside, the fire crackling inside. Two people on the edge of something neither quite dared name. Then Martha reached out, touched his hand briefly, the first deliberate contact between them. I need to check the animals, she said, but her voice was unsteady. I'll help. They bundled up and fought their way to the barn, the storm trying to knock them flat, inside. The animals huddled nervous, and they worked to calm them, add fresh straw, ensure water wasn't freezing. Sam's respect for Martha grew watching her gentle expertise with the beasts, the way she knew each by temperament. On the way back, the wind caught Martha off balance. Sam grabbed her arm to steady her, and they struggled together to the cabin door. Inside, breathing hard, they found themselves standing close, snow melting off their coats. Thank you, Martha said softly. For what? For seeing me as more than a problem to solve or a woman to pity? For just seeing me? Sam felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of bonds he'd tied tight for 8 years. Martha. But before he could find words, they heard it. Horses on the trail. Voices calling through the storm. Martha's face went hard. Get your rifle, she said. 3 riders materialized out of the snow, the same trio from before, but this time with liquid courage evident in their swaying. Roy Patterson dismounted, nearly falling, while the others stayed on their horses. Mrs. Brennan, Roy called, words slurring. Come to make an honest woman of you. Get off my land, Martha said clear and cold. Now that's no way to talk to your future husband, Roy laughed. Reverend says you need a man's guidance. I'm volunteering. Like hell you are. Sam stepped out beside Martha, rifle prominent. Roy's face went ugly. Should have known you'd be here, playing protector again, or just keeping her warm. Sam started forward, but Martha caught his arm. Roy Patterson, you're drunk and stupid. Go home before you do something that can't be undone. Can't leave you up here in sin, Hawkins chimed in, though he looked less certain than Roy. Whole town knows what's going on. What's going on? Martha said, voice like winter steel. Is 3 drunk fools trespassing on my property in a blizzard. You've got 1 minute to leave before I start shooting. You wouldn't dare, Brenner said. Martha raised her rifle, sighted careful, and put a bullet in the snow between Roy's feet. The young man jumped back with a yelp. That's your warning, she said, already levering another round. Next one won't miss. This ain't over, Roy said, but he was already backing toward his horse. Reverend's right about you, unnatural woman, thinking you can live like a man. I live like myself, Martha replied. Now get! They scrambled onto their horses and disappeared into the storm, Roy shouting threats that the wind tore away. Sam and Martha stood watching until they were gone, then went inside. They'll be back, Sam said. I know. Martha set her rifle by the door, hands trembling slightly now that danger had passed. With more men, or maybe the law, Reverend Dalton's got the sheriff's ear. Then we'll be ready. Martha looked at him, and Sam saw fear there for the first time. Not of the men, but of something else. Sam, I can't let you throw away your reputation for me. You've got a ranch, standing in the community. I've got an empty house and cows for company. He caught her hands, stilled their shaking. Martha, I've been dead inside for 8 years, since you opened that door in the storm. I've started feeling alive again. That's worth more than any reputation. She searched his face, her own walls crumbling. I'm scared, not of them, of this, of feeling again. So am I. Sam pulled her close, and she came willingly. 2 people holding each other like shipwreck survivors. But maybe scared together is better than safe alone. They stood that way long minutes, the storm raging outside, the fire warming them inside, not passionate like young lovers, but something deeper. Two souls who'd learned the weight of loss, finding they could still bear the risk of connection when they finally pulled apart. Martha's eyes were wet but determined. All right, Sam McKenna. We'll face whatever comes. Together. Together, he agreed, and sealed it with the first kiss either had shared in 7 years. Outside, the storm howled on, but inside the cabin, something new had taken shelter, fragile as spring grass under snow, but stubborn as the two people nurturing it. They'd found each other in winter's fury. Now they'd have to protect what they'd found from storms of a different kind. The storm cleared by morning, leaving the world white and pristine. Sam knew he should return to his ranch, but something had shifted in the night. He and Martha moved around each other with new awareness, fixing breakfast together like they'd done it for years instead of hours. I need to go to town, Martha said as they finished eating, running low on supplies. And it's better to face them now than let the talk fester. We'll go together. Sam? Together, Martha. That was the agreement. She studied his face, then nodded. They'd crossed a line last night, and there was no going back. Whatever came next, they'd meet it standing side by side. The ride to Copper Creek took longer than usual, snowdrifts making the trail treacherous. They spoke little, but Sam felt the connection between them like a physical thing, strong as rope and just as binding. Town was buzzing when they arrived. Sam saw curtains twitch, heads turn, conversations stop mid-sentence. By the time they reached Muller's store, a small crowd had gathered on the boardwalk. Morning, Mrs. Brennan, Mr. McKenna, Muller said carefully as they entered. Rough storm last night. We managed, Martha replied, moving through the store with her usual efficiency. Sam helped carry her selections to the counter, ignoring the whispers building behind them. But as Muller tallied the bill, Reverend Dalton entered, Bible in hand like a weapon. Mrs. Brennan, the Reverend said, voice carrying through the store. I'm glad to find you here. We need to discuss your situation. No discussion needed, Martha said, not looking up from counting out payment. On the contrary, your immortal soul is at stake. Woman, living in sin, refusing the sanctity of marriage. Careful, Reverend. Sam's voice came low and dangerous. You're talking about a lady. Dalton's eyes glittered with righteous fervor. A lady doesn't entertain men in her home unchaperoned. A lady doesn't flaunt God's law and priority's order. A lady, Martha said clearly, tends her sick neighbors without asking payment. A lady survives what would break most men. A lady minds her own business and expects others to do the same. You twist words, but facts remain. You're living improper, and now you've dragged McKenna into your sin. Sam stepped forward, but Martha caught his arm. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, eager for drama. Let me understand, Martha said. You're concerned about propriety? I'm concerned about your soul and the example you set for decent women. Then let me ease your mind. Reverend, Martha's voice rang clear. Mr. McKenna has asked me to marry him, and I've accepted. The words hit Sam like a physical blow. They'd shared a kiss. Yes, but marriage? He saw the challenge in Martha's eyes and understood. She was calling the town's bluff. That's right, he heard himself say. We'll be married proper. That satisfy your concern for her soul. Dalton's face went red. This wasn't the response he'd expected. When? And don't think some long engagement will, soon as you're willing to perform the ceremony. Martha cut in. Unless you have objections to joining two widowed people in holy matrimony, the Reverend spluttered, trapped by his own moralizing. The crowd murmured, excitement rippling through them. Roy Patterson pushed forward, face ugly with drink and disappointment. This is a sham, he declared. Everyone knows McKenna was just, choose your next words careful. Boy, Sam's hand moved to his sidearm. You're talking about my intended bride. Your intended? Roy laughed harsh. Yesterday she was just a convenience. Today she's marriage material. Pull the other one. Yesterday, Sam said, voice carrying to every ear. I was a fool too proud to admit what I wanted. Today I'm setting it right. Any man has issue with that can discuss it with me. Private-like. The threat hung heavy. Sam McKenna might be older, might have kept to himself these 8 years, but everyone remembered he'd fought in the war, survived Indian raids, built his ranch with gun and grit. Roy might be young and hot-headed, but he wasn't completely stupid. "When's this wedding, then?" someone called from the back. Sam looked at Martha, saw her slight nod. "Sunday next, if the Reverend's willing." All eyes turned to Dalton, who stood caught in his own trap. He demanded propriety, insisted on marriage. Now it was offered, and refusing would show his concern was more about control than conscience. "Sunday next," he ground out. "After morning service. We'll be there," Martha said, calm as summer morning. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have preparations to make." She swept from the store like a queen, Sam following with their supplies. Not until they were loaded in the wagon and heading out of town did she sag against the seat. "My God, what have I done?" "Called their bluff brilliant-like," Sam said, though his own heart was racing. "Question is, do we follow through?" Martha looked at him sideways. "Are you asking if I meant it?" "I'm asking what you want, not what spite demands or the town expects. What Martha Brennan wants." She was quiet so long Sam thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "I want to not be afraid anymore. I want to share my burdens with someone who understands them. I want—" She paused, gathering courage. "I want to wake up not alone, even if it's not the same as before. And marriage, real marriage, not just words to quiet gossips. I don't know." The honesty in her voice hurt and healed at once. "Can two people as damaged as us make something new? Or are we just fooling ourselves?" Sam guided the horses while he thought. Marriage to Clara had been young love, passionate and perfect until it shattered. This would be different. Two people choosing companionship over solitude, understanding over ignorance. "My house is bigger," he said finally. "Better for winter. You could bring what matters. Keep your cabin for healing work. We share chores, share meals, share the load. As for the rest," he felt heat climb his neck. "We're not young folks. We can work out sleeping arrangements that suit us both." Practical, but Martha's voice held warmth, like a business partnership. "If that's what you need it to be. But Martha," he reached over, took her hand. "I meant that kiss last night. May not be the love I had at 20, but it's something that could grow, given time and tending." Her fingers tightened on his. "I'm scared, Sam, scared of hoping again. So am I, but maybe scared together is better than safe alone." She finished. "You said that last night. Meant it then too." They rode in silence, hands linked between them. Two people who just upended their carefully constructed lives. In town behind them, gossip would be flying thick as winter crows, but ahead lay something neither had dared imagine. A second chance, different from the first, but maybe precious in its own way. "Sunday next," Martha said softly. "Lord help us." "He already did." Sam replied, "Sent a blizzard to blow me to your door. And now we see what comes of it." As they reached the fork where their paths split, his to the rocking M, hers to the mountain cabin, Sam pulled up the horses. "Stay with me tonight," he said, impulsive. Not improper-like, just, "I want to show you the house, your house. If we do this, want you to see if you could make a life there." Martha looked at him long and steady. "All right, but I need to tend my animals first. We'll go together. From now on, Martha, whatever needs doing, we go together." "That's a big promise." Sam McKenna. "Yes," he agreed. "It is." They turned toward the mountain, toward Martha's cabin, toward a future neither had expected. In 5 days they'd stand before God and town, pledging vows they'd never thought to speak again. It wasn't the romance of youth or the passion of first love. It was something else. Two winter souls finding warmth in shared purpose, shared understanding, shared hope that maybe, just maybe, spring could come again. The sun broke through the clouds as they climbed the trail, setting the snow to sparkling like promises waiting to be kept. Sunday would come soon enough with its challenges and changes. But today, they had this, hands linked, hearts cautious but willing, and the first fragile faith that alone didn't have to be forever. The gossips had wanted to force Martha into marriage, thinking to break her spirit or drive her out. Instead, they'd pushed two stubborn souls together, and from that union, something unexpected might bloom. Not the love they'd lost, that was buried with Clara and James and could never be recovered, but perhaps something different, something seasoned by sorrow but not defeated by it. As Martha's cabin came into view, Sam felt a lifting in his chest he hadn't experienced in 8 years. Not happiness exactly, but the possibility of it. And for two people who'd thought possibility died with their first loves, that was miracle enough to build on. "Ready?" Martha asked as they pulled up to her gate. "Ready," Sam confirmed, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in years. Whatever came next, gossip, adjustment, the challenge of two independent souls learning to move as one, they'd face it together. And that, Sam thought as he helped Martha from the wagon, was its own kind of love, different from what they'd known, but maybe, given time and courage, just as true. Sunday came clear and cold, the kind of winter morning that made the world seem new-made. Sam stood before his mirror, fumbling with the tie he hadn't worn since Clara's funeral. His hands shook slightly, and he cursed under his breath. "You've faced down claim jumpers and cattle thieves," he told his reflection. "No cause to be nervous over words in a church." But it wasn't just words, and he knew it. Today he'd pledge himself to Martha Brennan before God and the whole town. Not from young love's passion, but from something deeper, a choice made with eyes wide open, knowing all that could go wrong, choosing hope anyway. Pete knocked on the door. "Wagon's ready, Mr. McKenna. You sure you don't want me to drive?" "I'll manage." Sam took one last look in the mirror. The man staring back looked older than his years, but somehow lighter too, as if a burden had lifted. "You just get yourself to church. Don't want to miss this circus." The ride to town felt both eternal and too quick. Sam had spent the week preparing, moving things in his house to make room for Martha's belongings, clearing out Clara's old sewing room for Martha's herbs and healing supplies. Each change had felt like both betrayal and blessing, letting go and holding on in the same breath. The church was already filling when he arrived. Every busybody in the valley had come to witness what some called a scandal and others a miracle. Sam ignored them all, taking his place at the altar where Reverend Dalton waited with a face like he'd swallowed vinegar. "Second thoughts. McKenna?" Tom Harper asked quietly, standing as his witness. "Third and fourth thoughts," Sam admitted, "but they all lead to the same place." Then the door opened, and Martha entered on the arm of Doc Morrison, the old physician who'd agreed to give her away. She wore a simple gray dress, her hair pinned up proper, carrying a small bunch of winter berries instead of flowers. Sam's breath caught. Not from beauty in the conventional sense, but from the courage in her straight spine, the determination in her step. She looked neither right nor left at the packed pews, the whispers and stares. Her eyes found Sam's and held, and in that gaze he saw his own fears reflected and conquered. "Dearly beloved," Dalton began, his tone suggesting they were anything but beloved in his sight. "We gather to join this man and woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony passed in a blur. Sam heard himself speaking vows he'd never thought to say again, his voice steady despite the earthquake in his chest. Martha's responses came clear and firm. No hesitation even when Dalton lingered on "obey" like he hoped she'd balk. "The ring?" Dalton prompted. Sam pulled out the simple gold band he'd bought in Billings, not wanting town gossip over his purchase. As he slipped it on Martha's finger, he whispered low enough only she could hear, "This isn't replacing what we had. It's building something new." Her eyes went bright, and she squeezed his hand. "I know." "I now pronounce you man and wife," Dalton said with clear reluctance. "You may kiss your bride." This kiss was different from that first one in the storm. Public, proper, but somehow more precious for being chosen in daylight. before witnesses. When they parted, Sam saw tears on Martha's cheeks, but she was smiling. They turned to face the congregation, and Sam felt Martha tense beside him. The faces staring back ran the gamut: disappointment from those who'd wanted drama, satisfaction from the moral crusaders, genuine pleasure from the few who understood what courage this took. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tom Harper announced with clear satisfaction, "Mr. and Mrs. Samuel McKenna." Outside, rice and good wishes mixed with barely veiled speculation. Martha bore it all with grace. Though Sam felt her hand tremble in his, they'd done what the town demanded, but that didn't mean the judgment would stop. The reception at the Grange Hall was awkward. People unsure how to treat this sudden union. Some women who'd shunned Martha for years now felt obliged to offer wedding wishes. Men who'd speculated crude about her intentions now had to face Sam's steady gaze. Beautiful ceremony. Mrs. Muller simpered, though she'd been among the worst gossips. Such a surprise, but then love works in mysterious ways. "Indeed it does," Martha replied calmly. "Sometimes it looks like two people choosing to share their burdens rather than carry them alone." The honesty of it left Mrs. Muller speechless. Others approached with similar false cheer, and Martha met them all with that same devastating directness. She wasn't playing the blushing bride or the reformed woman. She was herself, unchanged except for the ring on her finger and the man at her side. Finally, blessedly, it was time to leave. Sam helped Martha into the wagon, noting how the crowd watched their every move. Let them wonder, he thought. The real test would come in the quiet days ahead. Two stubborn souls learning to bend without breaking. The ride to Sam's ranch, their ranch now, passed in thoughtful silence. As they turned up the drive, Sam saw Martha studying the house, the barns, the lay of the land with new eyes. This would be her home now. Their home. "It's bigger than I remembered," she said softly. "Too big for one person," Sam agreed. "Been rattling around in it like a dried pea in a pod." Inside, he watched her move through the rooms, touching surfaces light as butterfly wings. He'd cleaned best he could, but it was still clearly a house lacking a woman's presence. Martha paused in the kitchen, studying the big cast-iron stove. "This'll do fine for my herb preparations," she said. "Good light from the windows, plenty of room to work. Change whatever you need. It's your home now." Martha turned to him then, and Sam saw the uncertainty she'd been hiding all day. "Is it? How do we do this, Sam? How do we go from strangers to married in a week's time?" "Same way we'd cross dangerous water," Sam said, "one careful step at a time." They stood awkward in what was now their kitchen. Two people bound by law and choice, but not yet comfortable with either. Then Martha laughed, surprising them both. "Lord, what a pair we make. Like two cats circling, neither sure if the other bites." "Do you?" Sam asked. "Bite? I mean, only when provoked." But she was smiling now, tension easing. "Show me the rest. Sam, show me where we'll build this new life." They toured the house properly then, Sam pointing out improvements he'd made, Martha suggesting changes that might make it more homelike. When they reached the bedroom, both paused. "I set up the spare room," Sam said quickly. "Figured we'd work out arrangements as suits us both. No rush, no expectations." Martha's shoulders relaxed. "Thank you for understanding, for not assuming. We're not young folks. Martha, we've got time to figure out what we want this to be." That night they ate their first supper as married folk. A simple stew Martha improved with her herbs. Conversation came easier with just the two of them. No audience to perform for. They talked about combining their livestock, planning spring planting, the practical details of joining two lives. Later, sitting by the fire while Martha worked on her mending and Sam oiled his tack, the domesticity felt both foreign and right. This wasn't the passionate romance of youth. It was something quieter, but perhaps more lasting. "No regrets?" Martha asked without looking up from her needle. "None yet. You? Ask me in a month." But her tone was warm. "Sam, what you said at the altar about building something new, I want to really try. not just go through motions. So do I. He set aside the bridle, met her eyes across the hearth. We've both been winterlocked so long. Might take time to thaw, but I believe we can do it. Build something good here. Martha smiled then, the first full, unguarded smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, showing the woman she'd been before sorrow carved its lines. Then let's build it. Sam McKenna, one careful step at a time. As the fire burned low and they prepared for bed, in separate rooms, but under the same roof, Sam felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 years, anticipation for tomorrow. Not because the pain was gone or the past erased, but because he wouldn't face the future alone. Outside, spring was still months away, but inside the house on the rocking M, 2 winter hearts had begun the slow, careful work of thawing. The town had forced them together, thinking to break Martha's spirit. Instead, they'd created something unexpected, a partnership born of understanding, seasoned by loss, but reaching toward hope. The woman who'd kept her bed empty for 7 years had chosen to share her life, if not yet her bed, with a man who understood the weight of that choice, and the rancher who'd preferred cattle to company had opened his home to someone who might help it feel alive again. It wasn't the love story either had imagined in youth, but perhaps that made it more precious. This second chance built on truth instead of illusion, on choice instead of passion, on 2 people saying yes to the possibility of spring after the longest winter. In the spare room, Martha lay listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a new home. Down the hall, Sam did the same, both thinking of all that had brought them here, all that lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Merging 2 lives never came easy. But tonight, for the first time in years, neither would sleep entirely alone, and that, they'd both learned, was no small beginning. Thank you all for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long drive across the country. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and feedback mean the world to us.